The phone rang at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday that would split Maya Chen's life into before and after. She was standing barefoot in her small kitchen, steam rising from her coffee mug, watching the morning light filter through the gauzy curtains her grandmother had sewn decades ago. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, cold, clinical digits that seemed to pulse with authority. Ms. Chen, this is Agent Rodriguez from the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The voice was measured, professional, devoid of warmth. We need to schedule an appointment to discuss irregularities in your tax filings spanning the last 4 years. Maya's hand trembled as she set down her mug. Coffee splashed across the worn Formica counter, spreading in dark rivulets that reminded her suddenly of spilled ink, of signatures forged in darkness. I'm sorry, what? Criminal investigation? There must be some mistake. Ma'am, according to our records, you've filed multiple tax returns claiming various business deductions and reporting income from several sources that don't align with our information. We've also identified what appears to be identity theft related to your Social Security number. Can you be available Thursday at 2 p.m.? The words seemed to echo in the small apartment, bouncing off walls that suddenly felt too close, too confining. Maya sank into the kitchen chair her father had carved from oak when she was 7, its familiar grooves now offering no comfort. Her mind reeled backward through years of careful budgeting, meticulous record-keeping, the pride she'd taken in filing her own taxes each year with the methodical precision her accountant mother had taught her. Identity theft? She whispered, though she already knew. Somewhere deep in her chest, a cold certainty was crystallizing like ice forming on winter windows. Can you tell me what kind of business is? Agent Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of 1,000 similar conversations. Construction consulting, freelance marketing, apartment rental income from properties in 3 states you've never lived in. Ma'am, someone has been very busy with your Social Security number. After she hung up, Maya sat in the silence of her apartment, listening to the familiar sounds that had always been comfort. Mrs. Patterson's television through the thin walls, the rumble of the city bus at the corner, the gentle hum of her ancient refrigerator. But now these sounds seemed distant, as if she were hearing them through water, through the thickness of a life suddenly turned upside down. She thought of her brother Danny, 26 years old and perpetually in motion, always chasing the next opportunity, the next scheme that would finally set him free from what he called the trap of ordinary life. Danny, with his easy smile and restless energy, who had borrowed her laptop 6 months ago to update his resume, who had crashed on her couch countless times when his own plans fell through, and who had access to the small wooden box where she kept important documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, and yes, her Social Security card. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over in the chair, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Not Danny. Not her little brother who used to build elaborate Lego cities on her bedroom floor, who cried when she left for college, who called her her other half, because they'd grown up practically raising each other after their parents' divorce when Maya was 12 and Danny was 8. But even as she'd tried to push the thought away, memories surfaced unbidden. Danny's sudden interest in taxes last year, the way he'd peppered her with questions about deductions and business expenses, his new truck that appeared without explanation, the expensive clothes, the casual mention of consulting work that he never quite described, the phone calls he'd taken private, stepping out onto her fire escape to talk in hushed, urgent tones. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. Danny's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, her heart leapt with hope. Maybe he could explain this nightmare. Maybe there was some mistake, some misunderstanding that would make everything clear. Hey, sis, can we talk? Need some advice about something. Her hands shook as she typed back. Danny, I need to ask you something. Have you ever used my Social Security number for anything? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then silence. No response. She waited 15 minutes, then called him directly. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail,
his cheerful, confident voice telling callers to leave a message and he'd get back to them soon. Maya walked to her bedroom, to the small wooden box on her dresser that had belonged to their grandmother. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Her birth certificate was there, slightly wrinkled but intact. Her insurance cards, her passport. But the slot where she always kept her Social Security card was empty, just a rectangular outline in the dust where it had lain for years. She sank onto her bed, the same twin bed she'd slept in since high school, and stared at the empty space where her identity should have been. On the wall opposite hung a framed photograph from Danny's high school graduation, the two of them grinning in the sunshine, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking forward to futures they thought they could predict and control. In the photograph, Danny's eyes sparkled with mischief and ambition. Even then, at 18, he'd talked about making it big, about finding shortcuts to success that other people were too timid or too conventional to take. Maya had always admired his confidence, his refusal to accept limitations. She'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for his community college classes, had co-signed his first car loan, had believed in his dreams even when they seemed impossibly large for their small-town origins. Now she wondered if that unwavering faith had been a kind of blindness. Her phone rang again, Agent Rodriguez calling back with additional details about the investigation. As Maya listened to the growing list of fraudulent filings, the fabricated businesses, the false addresses spanning multiple states, she felt something inside her chest beginning to crack. Not just her heart, but her fundamental understanding of who she was, who Danny was, who they were to each other. The brothers she thought she knew would never have done this. But the evidence was mounting, like snow in a blizzard, cold and undeniable and suffocating in its completeness. 4 years of systematic fraud, hundreds of thousands of dollars in false deductions, her name, her identity, her carefully cultivated credit history, all of it weaponized against her by the person she trusted most in the world. Agent Rodriguez's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Chen, I want you to understand the seriousness of this situation. The Criminal Investigation Division only gets involved when potential felonies are suspected. You could be facing significant penalties, even prison time, if we can't establish that you were the victim rather than the perpetrator." Prison time. The words hit her like ice water. Maya had never even gotten a speeding ticket. She paid her bills early, filed her taxes in February, had never so much as kept a library book past its due date. And now she was potentially facing federal charges because Danny, had stolen her identity and built an empire of lies on the foundation of her good name. "What do I need to do?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "How do I prove I didn't do this?" "Document everything. Bank statements, employment records, anything that shows where you actually were and what you actually earned during the periods in question. And, Miss Chen, if you have any idea who might have had access to your personal information, we need those names immediately." After the call ended, Maya sat in the growing afternoon light, knowing that her life had just been divided into before and after. Before, when she was Maya Chen, responsible older sister and reliable employee, someone who existed in the comfortable predictability of routine and trust. After, when she became Maya Chen, victim of identity theft, potentially facing federal investigation, forced to prove her innocence against a web of lies so complex she couldn't yet see all its threads. But first, she had to find Danny. She had to look into his eyes and ask him directly, "Did you do this to me? Did you take my identity, my future, my peace of mind, and trade them for whatever scheme you're running now?"
And more terrifyingly, what would she do with the answer, whatever it might be? Maya had always been the responsible one. Even as a child, she was the sister who remembered to pack lunch money, who made sure Danny had clean clothes for a school picture day, who stayed awake during their parents' late-night arguments to comfort him when he crawled into her bed, small and frightened and smelling like the strawberry shampoo she helped him use during bath time. Their mother, Linda, had been a force of nature before the divorce, an accountant who ran the household with spreadsheets and color-coded calendars, who taught Maya the value of documentation and precision.
"Numbers don't lie, sweetheart," she used to say, her manicured fingers dancing across calculator keys. "People do, circumstances do, but numbers tell the truth." After the split, Linda became scattered, overwhelmed by single parenthood and the demands of rebuilding her career in a new city. She relied on Maya to fill the gaps, to be the steady presence that Danny needed. Their father, Michael, disappeared gradually and then all at once. First it was missed weekends, then forgotten birthday calls, then holiday cards that arrived weeks late with hastily scrawled signatures. By the time Maya turned 16, he was more myth than man, a collection of stories Danny clung to and Maya had learned to live without. So Maya became the bridge between childhood and adulthood for both of them. She worked afternoons at the local grocery stores, saved money for Danny's school supplies, helped him with homework while managing her own advanced placement courses. She learned to be someone others could count on because there was no alternative. Danny needed her, and need created its own kind of love, fierce and protective and sometimes exhausting. The morning after Agent Rodriguez's call, Maya sat in her small home office, really just a converted closet with a desk and filing cabinet, surrounded by 4 years' worth of meticulously organized tax documents. Every receipt was filed chronologically, every bank statement reconciled to the penny. This was her mother's legacy, the belief that proper documentation was both shield and sword against a chaotic world. She spread out her legitimate tax returns alongside printouts from the IRS website showing the fraudulent filings. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. Her real returns were simple, honest documents reflecting the modest income of a social worker who specialized in family counseling. The fake Maya Chen painted a picture of a business mogul with rental properties, consulting fees, and deductions that exceeded Maya's actual annual salary. The fake Maya Chen owned a construction consulting company called Precision Build Solutions. She apparently traveled extensively, claiming meals and lodging expenses in cities Maya had never visited. Maya realized with a sick feeling. The fake Maya even claimed charitable deductions to organizations that, when Maya looked them up, turned out to be fronts or didn't exist at all. Each false detail felt like a violation, as if someone had been living inside her skin, making decisions with her identity while she went about her real life completely unaware. The stranger impersonating her was confident, successful, entrepreneurial, everything Maya sometimes wondered if she should be but had never quite managed to become. Maya's real life was smaller, quieter, built on the foundation of helping others rather than accumulating wealth. She worked at Riverside Family Services, a nonprofit that provided counseling to families in crisis. Her days were spent in small, windowless rooms, listening to people describe their pain. Children caught between divorcing parents, teenagers struggling with addiction, elderly clients being financially exploited by family members. The irony was almost unbearable. She thought about Mrs. Kowalski, an 83-year-old woman whose grandson had been systematically stealing from her savings account. Maya had spent months helping her navigate the legal system, apply for victim services, and rebuild trust in her remaining family members. "She never thought he would hurt me," Mrs. Kowalski had said, her papery hands trembling as she signed police reports. "He used to call me his favorite person in the world."
Now Maya understood that particular brand of betrayal. The way it lodged in your chest like a splinter, impossible to ignore but too deep to extract cleanly. She understood the confusion, the way your mind kept circling back to memories, searching for clues you must have missed, signs you should have recognized. Danny had always been charming, but Maya was beginning to remember his charm differently. The way he could talk his way out of consequences, convince teachers to give him extra credit, persuade friends to lend him money they never saw again. She'd always framed it as charisma, as Danny's natural ability to connect with people. But what if it had been something else? What if she'd been watching manipulation disguised as magnetism? 3 days after the initial call, Maya finally reached Danny by showing up at his apartment unannounced. He lived in a trendy part of downtown, in a building with a doorman and floor-to-ceiling windows that must have cost more than Maya's annual salary. When he opened the door, his face cycled through surprise, guilt, and then a too bright smile that made her stomach clench.
Maya, what a great surprise. I was just thinking about calling you. He was wearing clothes she'd never seen before. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater that looked expensive and new. His apartment behind him was sleek and modern, nothing like the hand-me-down furniture and thrift store finds that had characterized his living spaces since college. We need to talk, Danny, about my social security number. His smile faltered for just a moment, but he stepped aside to let her in. Of course, come in. Can I get you some coffee? I just got this amazing espresso machine. Danny. She stood in his living room, taking in the leather furniture, the huge television, the art on the walls that looked original rather than printed. The IRS called me. Criminal Investigation Division. They think I've been filing fraudulent tax returns for 4 years. Danny sank into his expensive couch, and for a moment he looked like the 8-year-old boy who used to hide behind Maya's legs when strangers came to the door. Maya, I can explain. Then explain. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than she'd heard him since childhood. It started as a mistake. I was filling out some paperwork for a job application, and I accidentally used your social instead of mine. The numbers are so similar, you know? And then when I realized what I'd done, I figured it wasn't a big deal. One small mistake. Maya felt the ground shifting under her feet. What kind of job application? Independent contractor stuff. Construction work, mostly. Cash jobs. And when tax time came around, I had all these 1099s with your social security number on them instead of mine. I thought if I just filed a simple return, claimed some basic deductions, it would balance out. Danny, that's not a mistake. That's fraud. I know that now. But Maya, I was in a really bad place financially. You remember how things were after I got laid off from the warehouse job? I was about to lose my apartment. I had credit cards calling me every day. And then suddenly I had this income coming in under your name, and I thought maybe this was the universe giving me a break. Maya sank into the chair across from him, feeling suddenly exhausted. So, you kept going. For 4 years, you kept using my name to file fake tax returns. It wasn't supposed to go on this long. Every year I told myself I'd figure out how to fix it, how to straighten everything out. But then the deductions got bigger, and the refunds got bigger, and I was finally making real money for the first time in my life. He gestured around the apartment, and Maya could see something like pride warring with shame in his expression. I was able to take care of myself, Maya. I wasn't the screw-up little brother anymore. You were using my name to take care of yourself. My credit, my reputation, my future. I was going to pay it back. Danny leaned forward, his eyes bright with the same earnestness that had gotten him out of trouble countless times throughout their childhood. I was building up
Enough money to hire a lawyer, figure out how to make this right without getting either of us in trouble. I never meant for you to get hurt. Maya stared at her brother, this man who had been the center of her world for so long, who she had protected and supported and believed in through every setback and disappointment. He looked successful now, confident in his expensive clothes and designer apartment. But she could see the scared little boy underneath, the one who had never learned that actions had consequences that couldn't be charmed or explained away. Danny, they're talking about federal charges. Prison time. Do you understand what you've done to my life? I'll fix it. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. Maya, I promise I'll fix it. I'll get a lawyer, I'll confess to everything, I'll make sure they know you had nothing to do with it. With what money? The money you stole using my identity? For the first time, Danny looked truly afraid. I have savings, real savings from legitimate work I've been doing lately. I can hire good representation for both of us. Maya felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. What legitimate work, Danny? What are you actually doing for money now? He hesitated,
And in that hesitation, Maya saw the shape of more lies, more schemes, more ways her brother had learned to take shortcuts through a world that demanded honesty and hard work from everyone else. "I've been helping people with their taxes," he said finally. "People who don't understand the system, who are missing out on deductions they're entitled to. I show them how to maximize their returns." Maya closed her eyes. "You're teaching other people to commit tax fraud." "I'm helping them get what they deserve from a system that's rigged against working people, using the techniques you learned by stealing my identity." Danny was quiet for a long time. When Maya opened her eyes, she found him looking at her with something she'd never seen before. Not the adoration of her little brother, not the desperate neediness she'd grown accustomed to, but something calculating and cold. "Maya, you've always been so rigid about rules and regulations, but the system doesn't work for people like us. You think following every regulation and paying every tax and being perfectly honest is going to get you anywhere? You're 32 years old, living in a studio apartment, driving a car that's older than some of your clients. When has playing by the rules ever actually paid off for you?" The words hit her like a slap. Maya stood up slowly, feeling like she was moving through water. "I need to go." "Maya, wait. Let's figure this out together. We're family." She paused at the door, looking back at the stranger wearing her brother's face. "Family doesn't steal each other's identities, Danny. Family doesn't build their success on someone else's ruin." "I never meant to ruin you." Maya met his eyes one last time. "But you did anyway, and that might be the most honest thing you've said to me in years." Maya's next few weeks unfolded like a waking nightmare, each day bringing new revelations about the scope of Danny's deception and new demands from the IRS investigation. Agent Rodriguez had been replaced by a team of investigators, and Maya found herself shuttling between lawyers' offices, government buildings, and her increasingly precarious job at Riverside Family Services. The first major blow came when she met with Janet Harrison, the criminal defense attorney recommended by Legal Aid. Harrison was a sharp-edged woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen every variety of human failing and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Miss Chen, I'm going to be frank with you," Harrison said, spreading documents across her conference table. "The government has built a compelling case that you orchestrated this fraud. The Social Security number is yours, the address on many of the returns is your actual address, and some of the supporting documentation appears to have been mailed to your apartment." Maya felt the air leave her lungs. "Mailed to my apartment? What?" W-2s from companies that don't exist, 1099s for services never rendered, receipts for business expenses that were fabricated, all sent to 412 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Your apartment. "I never received any of that mail." Harrison made a note. "Do you live alone? Anyone else have access to your mailbox?" Maya's throat tightened. "My brother has a key, Danny. He's stayed with me on and off over the years, and I gave him a key so he could come and go without disturbing me." "The brother you suspect of committing the actual fraud?" "Yes." Harrison sat back in her chair. "Here's the problem, Maya. From the IRS's perspective, they have 4 years of consistent fraudulent activity connected to your Social Security number, with supporting documents sent to your address. Your brother having access to your mail helps establish how the documents got there, but it doesn't prove you didn't know about them." Maya stared at the papers scattered across the table, her life reduced to evidence in a federal criminal case. "What about the fact that I was working full-time at Riverside during all the periods when these fake businesses were supposedly operating? I have employment records, timesheets, witness testimony." That helps establish that you couldn't have been personally running these fictitious companies, but it doesn't prove you weren't aware of and benefiting from the fraud. Harrison leaned forward. "Maya, I need to ask you directly. Did you receive any money from your brother during this period? Any gifts, any help with expenses, anything that might have come from the fraudulent refunds?" Maya thought back through the years, her memory suddenly sharp and terrible. Danny's occasional gifts, groceries when she was between paychecks, a new winter coat when hers finally fell apart, the security deposit for her current apartment when her landlord demanded it up front. Money that had seemed like his way of showing appreciation, of giving back after all the times she'd helped him. He helped me sometimes, small amounts, maybe a few $100s here and there. I thought he was finally getting stable, earning steady money. How much would you estimate total? Maya did the math in her head, each calculation feeling like another weight added to her chest. Maybe $3,000 or $4,000 over the years. Harrison wrote this down, her expression carefully neutral. The government could argue that constitutes financial benefit from the criminal activity. It complicates your defense. After the meeting with Harrison, Maya walked through downtown in a daze, her mind spinning through the legal and financial implications of her situation. She had to take unpaid leave from work to deal with the investigation, which meant her already tight budget was now completely unsustainable. The legal fees alone would wipe out her modest savings, and that was assuming she could avoid criminal charges. Her phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "I heard you hired a lawyer. We should coordinate our stories so they align." Maya stared at the message, feeling something cold and angry unfurling in her chest. Coordinate their stories. As if this were some minor inconvenience they could smooth over with the right narrative. As if her destroyed credit and potential federal charges were just details to be managed.
She deleted the message without responding. The second major blow came during her follow-up meeting with Agent Rodriguez, who had remained involved despite the expanded investigation team. They met at the federal building downtown in a gray conference room that smelled like industrial carpet and recycled air. "Ms. Chen, we've been investigating your brother's activities, and we need to inform you that the scope of this case extends well beyond your identity theft," Rodriguez said, consulting a thick file folder. "Daniel Chen appears to be operating what we believe is a tax preparation scheme targeting low-income individuals and recent immigrants." Maya's heart sank. A scheme? He's been advertising services to help people maximize their tax returns by claiming false deductions, fabricating business expenses, and creating fictitious dependents. We estimate he's prepared fraudulent returns for at least 40 clients over the past 2 years, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in false refunds. The room seemed to tilt around Maya. 40 clients? Many of them don't speak English as their primary language, which made them particularly vulnerable to his claims that he could navigate the system better than traditional tax preparers. He charged them upfront fees and promised refunds that were 2 or 3 times larger than what they would have legitimately received. Maya thought about her own clients at Riverside, families struggling to make ends meet, immigrants trying to build new lives in an unfamiliar system, elderly people on fixed incomes. The idea of Danny preying on people like that made her physically sick. "What happens to those 40 families now?" she asked. Agent Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "They'll be audited. Most will face significant penalties and interest on the fraudulent refunds they received. Some may face criminal charges, though we typically focus prosecution efforts on the preparers rather than the victims. But their lives will be ruined. Their financial situations will be very difficult, yes. Many will lose their homes, their savings, their ability to support their families." He paused. "Ms. Chen, we need your help building the case against your brother. Your cooperation could be beneficial for your own situation." Maya understood what she was being offered, a chance to save herself by helping destroy Danny. But the weight of those 40 families, those children who might lose their homes because of her brother's schemes, made the choice feel less like betrayal and more like justice. What kind of cooperation? Phone calls, documented conversations, anything that might help us understand the full extent of his operation. We believe there may be other associates involved, other preparers he's training in these techniques. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd learned. Danny wasn't just the irresponsible little brother she'd always protected. He was a criminal who had systematically exploited vulnerable people, using techniques he'd perfected by stealing her identity.
The boy who used to cry when other kids were mean to animals had grown into a man who destroyed families for profit. Her phone rang. Danny's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. But Agent Rodriguez's words echoed in her mind. They needed evidence, documentation, recorded proof of what Danny had done. "Hi, Danny." "Danny, thank God, I've been trying to reach you for days. Listen, I think I have a solution to our problem." "Our problem?" "The IRS thing. I've been talking to some people, and there might be a way to make this all disappear. But I need you to sign some papers, maybe make a few statements about how the whole thing was a misunderstanding."
Maya felt something inside her chest turn to ice. What kind of statements? Just that you gave me permission to use your social security number, that you knew about the returns I was filing. Nothing major, just enough to show that this wasn't fraud. It was a family arrangement that got complicated. Danny, you want me to lie to federal investigators to cover up your crimes? I want you to help me fix a situation that got out of hand. Maya, if you cooperate with me, I can make sure you never face any charges. I know people. I have connections now. But if you work with them against me... The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Maya realized she was looking at a complete stranger, someone who shared her DNA but none of her values, none of the moral framework she'd thought they'd inherited from the same parents, the same childhood. "Are you threatening me, Danny?" "I'm trying to protect you. But Maya, if you testify against me, if you help them build a case, I'll have to make sure they understand that you weren't as innocent in all this as you're pretending to be." Maya's hand tightened on the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means I kept very good records of every time I helped you financially, every time you benefited from money that came from those tax returns. It means I have documentation showing that you asked questions about the returns, that you knew more than you're admitting." Maya felt the world tilt around her. "That's not true." "Maya, truth is just a matter of perspective and documentation. You taught me that, actually. All those years watching you keep perfect records, learning how important it is to have paperwork that supports your version of events." After Danny hung up, Maya sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, understanding, finally, that she was completely alone in this fight. The little brother she'd protected and supported and loved unconditionally had become someone willing to destroy her to save himself. Worse, he'd learned how to do it using the very lessons about documentation and precision that their mother had taught them both. But Maya had learned something else from their mother. Numbers don't lie, and neither do phone records. The conversation she just had with Danny had been recorded on Agent Rodriguez's equipment, and every word of it would be documented, transcribed, and added to the growing case file. Danny had just made a critical mistake. He'd revealed the calculating, manipulative criminal he'd become while simultaneously providing evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. For the first time since this nightmare began, Maya felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Not hope that her life would go back to the way it was. That was impossible now. But hope that justice might actually be possible. That the 40 families Danny had victimized might see some kind of resolution. That the scared 8-year-old boy who used to hide behind her legs might finally face consequences for what the man he'd become had done. Maya walked to her kitchen and made coffee, then sat down at her small table to begin writing everything she could remember about Danny's activities over the past few years. Every suspicious conversation, every unexplained purchase, every moment when her instincts had whispered that something wasn't right, but her love for her brother had silenced those doubts. It was going to be a long night, but for the first time in weeks, Maya felt like she was finally doing the right thing. The investigation accelerated rapidly after Danny's recorded threat.
Agent Rodriguez called Maya at 6 a.m. the next morning, his voice carrying an urgency she hadn't heard before.
Ms. Chen, we need you to come in immediately. That conversation from last night has opened up several new avenues of investigation, and we have some developments you need to be aware of. Maya arrived at the federal building to find a conference room full of investigators, prosecutors, and what appeared to be representatives from multiple law enforcement agencies. Janet Harrison was already there, looking grim but determined. Maya, Harrison said as she sat down, they've been very busy overnight. Agent Rodriguez spread a series of photographs across the table. Surveillance images of Danny entering and leaving various locations around the city. After your brother's call last night, we expedited several aspects of our investigation. We executed search warrants on his apartment, his office, and 3 storage units he's been renting under various names. Maya stared at the photos. In one, Danny was carrying boxes into a nondescript office building. In another, he was meeting with a man Maya didn't recognize in what appeared to be a restaurant parking lot. He looked confident, professional, nothing like the panicked little brother who had threatened her on the phone. What did you find? U.S. Attorney Sarah Kim, a woman Maya recognized from local news stories about white-collar crime prosecutions, took over the presentation. Ms. Chen, your brother has been operating what we believe is one of the largest tax fraud schemes we've encountered in this district. The documents we recovered show systematic fraud involving not just identity theft, but organized criminal activity that spans multiple states and involves dozens of co-conspirators. Kim opened a thick binder filled with what appeared to be client lists, financial records, and training materials. Danny didn't just victimize you and the 40 clients we initially identified. He's been recruiting and training other fraudulent tax preparers, providing them with templates, fake documentation, and sophisticated techniques for evading detection. Maya felt dizzy. How many people are we talking about? Based on the records we've recovered, we estimate over 300 families have been victimized, with total fraudulent refunds exceeding $2 million. The number hit Maya like a physical blow. $2 million. 300 families. She thought about Mrs. Kowalski, about all her clients at Riverside who struggled to pay basic expenses, who trusted the system to treat them fairly. Danny had weaponized that trust, turned it into a tool for systematic exploitation. Agent Rodriguez pulled out another set of documents. Maya, we found extensive records relating to you specifically. Your brother kept detailed files on your finances, your work schedule, your personal relationships. He's been monitoring your life far more closely than you realized. He showed her photocopies of bank statements, her bank statements, somehow obtained without her knowledge. Records of her employment at Riverside, including performance reviews and salary information she'd never shared with anyone. Even copies of her rental applications and utility bills going back years. How did he get all this? Identity theft is rarely a one-time event, Kim explained. Once someone has your social security number, they can often access a remarkable amount of additional information. Your brother has been systematically collecting data about you since at least 2019, probably as insurance against exactly this kind of investigation. Maya stared at the files, feeling violated in ways she was still learning to understand. He was building a case against me. In essence, yes. He created documentation designed to support a narrative where you were either a knowing participant in the fraud or someone who benefited from it so significantly that prosecuting you would be justified. Harrison leaned forward. Maya, this is actually good news for your defense. It shows premeditation, sophisticated planning, and a clear intent to frame you if he was caught. No innocent person creates this kind of elaborate backup plan. Kim nodded. Ms. Chen, based on what we've discovered, we're prepared to offer you complete immunity from prosecution in exchange for your cooperation in building the case against your brother and his network. Maya should have felt relief, but instead she felt something closer to grief. Complete immunity meant she was truly free, but it also meant the government believed Danny was guilty of crimes serious enough to warrant significant prison time. The little brother she'd raised was going to federal prison, and her testimony would help put him there. What does cooperation mean, exactly? Continued recorded phone calls, possible undercover meetings, testimony before a grand jury, and at trial. Your brother reached out to you because he believed family loyalty would protect him. We need to show that criminal behavior doesn't get to hide behind family relationships. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya found herself living a double life that felt like something from a movie she never wanted to star in. During the day, she returned to work at Riverside Family Services, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while her world crumbled around her. Her supervisor, Patricia Williams, had been understanding about the time off, but Maya could see the concern in her eyes, the unspoken questions about why her usually reliable employee was suddenly distracted and stressed. "Maya, honey, are you sure you're ready to be back?" Patricia asked during their weekly supervision meeting. "You seem like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Maya wanted to tell her everything about Danny, about the investigation, about the way her own brother had turned her life into evidence in a federal crime. But the immunity agreement came with strict confidentiality requirements. She couldn't discuss the case with anyone outside the investigation team. "I'm dealing with some family issues," she said instead. "Legal stuff. It should be resolved soon." Patricia studied her with the same careful attention Maya used with her own clients when she suspected there was more to their stories. "If you need anything, time off, a reduced caseload, someone to talk to, just ask. We take care of our own here." The kindness in Patricia's voice made Maya's throat tighten. These people were her real family now. The colleagues who trusted her, the clients who depended on her, the community she'd built through honest work and genuine care. Danny had never understood that kind of connection, had never valued the slow, steady building of relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment preparing for another recorded call with Danny. Agent Rodriguez had briefed her on what information they needed: details about Danny's associates, the locations where he conducted business, the methods he used to recruit new clients and co-conspirators. When Danny called, his voice carried a desperate edge that was new and unsettling. "Maya, I need to see you in person. There are things I can't say over the phone." I don't think that's a good idea, Danny. Please, I'm your brother. Don't I deserve a chance to explain everything face to face?" Maya closed her eyes, thinking about the 40 families, now 300 families, whose lives Danny had destroyed. "Where do you want to meet?" "Remember that coffee shop, your mom's old place, where we used to go after visiting her grave?" The location hit Maya like a punch to the stomach. Greystone Cemetery was where her mother was buried, and the little coffee shop across the street held some of their most important conversations over the years. Danny choosing that place felt like emotional manipulation of the worst kind. "Danny, don't do this."
Don't do what? Try to talk to my sister at a place that means something to both of us? Maya, I'm drowning here. I've made mistakes, big mistakes, but I'm still the same person who used to build Lego cities with you. After the call, Maya sat in her bathroom and cried for the first time since this nightmare began. Not just for herself, but for the little boy Danny had been, for the man she'd hoped he would become, for the families whose trust he'd betrayed, and for the impossible choice she faced between justice and family loyalty. The meeting at the coffee shop was scheduled for the following afternoon. Maya would be wearing a wire, surrounded by undercover agents, attempting to get her brother to confess to federal crimes while sitting across from their mother's grave. The next morning brought another revelation that shattered what remained of Maya's faith in her brother's capacity for redemption. Agent Rodriguez called with news that the investigation had uncovered financial records showing Danny had been systematically stealing from his elderly clients, in addition to filing fraudulent tax returns. "Maya, we found evidence that your brother convinced at least 12 elderly clients to give him power of attorney over their financial affairs. He told them it would help him maximize their tax benefits, but he's been using that access to steal directly from their bank accounts." Maya felt something inside her chest simply break. How much? Preliminary estimates suggest over $400,000 across multiple victims. We're talking about people in their 70s and 80s who trusted him with their life savings. Maya thought about Mr. Peterson, one of her clients at Riverside, whose grandson had stolen his entire retirement account. The old man had sat in her office, tears streaming down his face, saying, "I don't understand how someone I loved so much could hurt me like this." Now she understood exactly how that felt. That afternoon, Maya sat across from Danny in the coffee shop, watching him charm the elderly waitress with the same easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble their entire childhood. He looked tired, but still confident, still convinced that he could talk his way out of consequences. "Maya, I know you're angry with me. I know I've screwed up badly, but I need you to understand that everything I did because I was trying to build something better for both of us. By stealing from old people, Danny? By taking money from families who trusted you?" Danny's smile faltered. "You don't understand how the system works. These people, they were getting screwed by traditional tax preparers who don't know how to work the system. I was helping them get what they deserved. You stole $400,000 from elderly clients who gave you power of attorney. I borrowed money that they weren't using efficiently. Maya, these people have thousands sitting in savings accounts earning nothing, while I could invest it, grow it, make it work for all of us." Maya stared at her brother, finally understanding that there was no reaching him, no way to make him see the harm he'd caused. He had constructed an elaborate justification for every crime, every betrayal, every life he'd destroyed. In his mind, he was the hero of his own story, the clever underdog who'd figured out how to beat a rigged system. "Maya, Mrs. Rodriguez is 81 years old. You stole her entire Social Security savings. She can't afford her medications now." "That's temporary. Once I get my business fully established, I'll be able to pay everyone back with interest." "What business, Danny? You don't have a business. You have a criminal enterprise." For the first time, Danny's mask slipped completely. She saw anger in his eyes, cold and calculating, and utterly foreign to the brother she'd thought she'd known.
Maya, you've always been so self-righteous. You work your little nonprofit job, helping people fill out forms and process their feelings, and you think that makes you some kind of saint. But you've never built anything, never taken a real risk, never tried to create actual change in the world. I help people, Danny. I don't exploit them. You enable them on a system designed to keep them poor. I was teaching them how to take what they're owed. Maya felt something final settling in her chest. This wasn't her brother anymore. Maybe it never had been. This was a stranger who happened to share her childhood, who had learned to weaponize her love and loyalty for his own purposes. I can't do this anymore, Danny. I can't pretend that what you've done is fixable or forgivable. So you're going to testify against me? Send your own brother to prison? I'm going to tell the truth about what you've done to hundreds of families, what you've done to me. Danny leaned back in his chair, and when he smiled, it was cold and empty. Maya, if you testify against me, I will make sure everyone knows exactly how much you benefited from my crimes. I'll make sure your precious nonprofit job disappears, that no one in the social work field will ever trust you again. Go ahead, Danny. Do whatever you think you need to do. Maya stood up, looking down at this stranger wearing her brother's face. But understand that every threat you make, every attempt to intimidate me, just proves that the little boy I loved is completely gone. You killed him yourself, and I'm finally ready to stop pretending he's coming back. As she walked away from the coffee shop, past their mother's grave, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom from the obligation to save someone who refused to be saved. For the first time since childhood, she was truly alone, but she was also finally free to build a life based on her own values, rather than her brother's endless need for rescue. The Wire had captured everything. Danny's confessions, his threats, his complete lack of remorse for the families he destroyed. The investigation team had the evidence they needed to prosecute not just Danny, but the entire network of fraudulent tax preparers he'd been training. Maya walked home through the city she'd learned to love, past the community center where she volunteered, past the grocery store where the owner knew her name, past all the small connections that made up a life built on honesty and service, rather than exploitation and shortcuts. Tomorrow, she would testify before a grand jury. She would help ensure that justice was served for Mrs. Rodriguez and the 300 other families Danny had victimized. And she would begin the long process of rebuilding a life that was finally completely her own. 6 months after Maya's testimony helped secure indictments against Danny and 14 co-conspirators in what federal prosecutors called one of the most sophisticated tax fraud schemes in the district's history, she stood in a courtroom watching her brother accept a plea agreement that would send him to federal prison for 8 years. Danny looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, diminished in ways that went beyond the institutional clothing. The confident swagger that had carried him through life was gone, replaced by something that resembled the scared little boy Maya remembered, but which she now recognized as merely another manipulation, a final attempt to evoke sympathy from the judge and the family members of his victims who had come to see justice served. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, her arthritic hands folded over a worn purse that now contained the few dollars she had left after Danny's theft. Beside her, the Martinez—
Maya, you've always been so self-righteous. You work your little nonprofit job, helping people fill out forms and process their feelings, and you think that makes you some kind of saint. But you've never built anything, never taken a real risk, never tried to create actual change in the world. I help people, Danny. I don't exploit them. You enable their dependence on a system designed to keep them poor. I was teaching them how to take what they're owed. Maya felt something final settling in her chest. This wasn't her brother anymore. Maybe it never had been. This was a stranger who happened to share her childhood, who had learned to weaponize her love and loyalty for his own purposes. I can't do this anymore, Danny. I can't pretend that what you've done is fixable or forgivable. So you're going to testify against me? Send your own brother to prison? I'm going to tell the truth about what you've done to hundreds of families, what you've done to me. Danny leaned back in his chair, and when he smiled, it was cold and empty. Maya, if you testify against me, I will make sure everyone knows exactly how much you benefited from my crimes. I'll make sure your precious nonprofit job disappears, that no one in the social work field will ever trust you again. Go ahead, Danny. Do whatever you think you need to do. Maya stood up, looking down at the stranger wearing her brother's face. But understand that every threat you make, every attempt to intimidate me just proves that the little boy I loved is completely gone. You killed him yourself, and I'm finally ready to stop pretending he's coming back. As she walked away from the coffee shop, past their mother's grave, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom from the obligation to save someone who refused to be saved. For the first time since childhood, she was truly alone, but she was also finally free to build a life based on her own values rather than her brother's endless need for rescue. The Wire had captured everything: Danny's confessions, his threats, his complete lack of remorse for the families he'd destroyed. The investigation team had the evidence they needed to prosecute not just Danny, but the entire network of fraudulent tax preparers he had been training. Maya walked home through the city she'd learned to love, past the community center where she volunteered, past the grocery store where the owner knew her name,
past all the small connections that made up a life built on honesty and service rather than exploitation and shortcuts. Tomorrow, she would testify before a grand jury. She would help ensure that justice was served for Mrs. Rodriguez and the 300 other families Danny had victimized. And she would begin the long process of rebuilding a life that was finally, completely her own. 6 months after Maya's testimony helped secure indictments against Danny and 14 co-conspirators in what federal prosecutors called one of the most sophisticated tax fraud schemes in the district, she stood in a courtroom watching her brother accept a plea agreement that would send him to federal prison for 8 years. Danny looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, diminished in ways that went beyond the institutional clothing. The confident swagger that carried him through life was gone, replaced by something that resembled the scared little boy Maya remembered, but which she now recognized as merely another manipulation, a final attempt to evoke sympathy from the judge and the family members of his victims who had come to see justice served. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, her arthritic hands folded over a worn purse that now contained the few dollars she had left after Danny's theft. Beside her, the Martinez family, parents and 3 young children who had lost their home when the IRS demanded repayment of fraudulent refunds Danny had generated. Behind them, dozens of other victims, representing hundreds more who couldn't afford to take time off work to attend the hearing. When Judge Catherine Morrison asked if Danny had anything to say before sentencing, he stood slowly and turned toward the gallery of victims. "I want to apologize to everyone I've hurt. I know my actions caused real harm to real families, and I will carry that knowledge with me for the rest of my life." His voice was steady, rehearsed, hitting all the notes his lawyer had undoubtedly coached him to strike. "I especially want to apologize to my sister Maya, who trusted me and whose trust I violated in ways that can never be repaired." Maya felt nothing as she listened to words that might have been genuine, but sounded exactly like every other apology Danny had offered throughout their childhood, carefully crafted to minimize consequences rather than acknowledge the full scope of harm he'd caused. Judge Morrison was not impressed. "Mr. Chen, your fraud operation targeted some of the most vulnerable members of our community, elderly individuals, immigrant families, people struggling to make ends meet who trusted you to help them navigate a complex system. You didn't just steal their money, you stole their faith in institutions designed to protect them." The judge's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many cases where trust was weaponized against the innocent. "Your operation generated over $2 million in fraudulent refunds and caused immeasurable harm to families who are still dealing with the financial and emotional consequences of your crimes." Danny was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He would be required to pay full restitution to his victims, money that everyone in the courtroom knew he didn't have and would likely never be able to earn. After the hearing, Maya found herself standing on the courthouse steps with Agent Rodriguez and several of the victims' families. Mrs. Rodriguez approached her slowly, her eyes kind but tired. "Miss Chen, I want you to know that what you did took courage. I know it wasn't easy to testify against your own brother." Maya felt her throat tighten. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm so sorry for what he took from you. I wish I had realized what he was doing sooner." The elderly woman reached out and took Maya's hand. "Mija, you can't blame yourself for someone else's choices. You did the right thing when you learned the truth. That's what matters." As the crowd dispersed, Maya walked through downtown toward Riverside Family Services, where Patricia had been holding her job and where a new kind of work was waiting for her. The investigation had revealed systemic problems in how tax preparation services were regulated, particularly for services targeting vulnerable populations. Maya had been asked to help develop new victim services protocols and educational programs. The irony wasn't lost on her. Danny's crimes had inadvertently positioned her to help prevent exactly the kind of exploitation he had perfected. She would be working with families recovering from financial fraud, helping them navigate the complex process of rebuilding their credit, their savings, and their trust in institutions. When Maya arrived at Riverside, she found Patricia waiting with a stack of case files and a cup of coffee prepared exactly the way Maya liked it. A small kindness that somehow felt monumental after months of betrayal and legal proceedings. "How are you holding up?" Patricia asked. Maya considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she would have said she was fine, would have minimized her own trauma to avoid worrying others, but the investigation had taught her something about the importance of honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. "I'm sad," she said finally. "Not just about Danny, but about all the time I wasted believing in someone who wasn't real. I'm angry about the families he hurt, and I'm scared about starting over without the safety net I thought I had."
Patricia nodded. Those all sound like completely reasonable feelings. But I'm also... Maya paused, searching for the right words. I'm relieved. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have to worry about what crisis Danny is creating or how I'm going to fix it. I can focus on my own life, my own work, my own relationships. Over the following months, Maya threw herself into her new role with an intensity that surprised her colleagues and clients. She developed workshops for immigrant families on how to identify predatory tax preparers. She created support groups for elderly victims of financial fraud. She worked with legal aid organizations to streamline the process of helping fraud victims navigate IRS procedures. The work was difficult and often heartbreaking. Maya sat with families as they described losing their homes, their savings, their faith in the American dream that had brought them to this country. She helped elderly clients understand that the shame they felt wasn't deserved, that sophisticated criminals had deliberately targeted their trust and generosity. But the work was also healing in ways Maya hadn't expected. Every family she helped rebuild their finances was a small victory against the system Danny had represented. Every workshop that taught people to recognize fraud was a step toward preventing other families from experiencing what Danny's victims had endured. One afternoon, nearly a year after Danny's sentencing, Maya was leading a financial literacy workshop at the community center when she noticed a young woman in the back row who looked familiar. After the session, the woman approached Maya hesitantly. "Ms. Chen? I'm Sophia Martinez. My family, we were some of your brother's victims." Maya recognized her immediately, one of the children from the family that had lost their home. Sophia would have been about 16 during the trial, and now she looked older, more serious than any teenager should have been. "Sophia, how's your family doing?" "We're okay. We found a new apartment, and my parents are both working again. It's been hard, but we're managing." Sophia paused, then looked directly at Maya. "I wanted to thank you." Maya felt confused. "Thank me?" "For testifying against him, for choosing what was right over what was easy." Sophia's voice was steady, mature beyond her years. "I was so angry for a long time, at your brother, at the system, at everyone. But watching you do the right thing, even when it hurt you, it helped me understand that not everyone is like him." Maya felt tears pricking her eyes. "Sophia, I'm so sorry about what my brother did to your family." "I know you are, but you're not responsible for his choices. You're only responsible for yours." Sophia smiled, and Maya could see strength there that hadn't been present during the trial. "I'm starting college next year. Social work program. I want to help families like mine." After Sophia left, Maya sat in the empty community center, surrounded by the chairs and whiteboards and educational materials that made up her new life. She thought about the girl Danny had been, the scared 8-year-old who built Lego cities and cried when she left for college. That boy was real, but he had also been incomplete. Maya was finally learning to mourn him without sacrificing herself to the man he had chosen to become. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, her chest tightened. Danny had tried to contact her several times from prison, messages she deleted without reading. But this message was from Agent Rodriguez. "Thought you'd want to know. We just arrested 3 more tax preparers using techniques from your brother's operation. Your testimony helped us recognize the pattern. Thanks for making a difference."
Maya smiled, looking around the community center where she now taught people to protect themselves from predators like Danny. This was her legacy now. Not the sister who had enabled a criminal, but the woman who had chosen justice over family loyalty when it mattered most.
She packed up her materials and headed home to her new apartment, a small one-bedroom in a building where she knew her neighbors' names, and her landlord appreciated tenants who paid rent early and took care of the property. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. 3 years later, Maya stood at the podium in the main conference room of the National Association of Social Workers, looking out at an audience of several hundred professionals who had come to hear her speak about financial fraud prevention and victim services. In the 3 years since Danny's sentencing, she had become something she never expected, a nationally recognized expert in helping families recover from sophisticated financial crimes. The presentation she was about to give was part of her new life as Director of Financial Crime Victim Services for a coalition of nonprofit organizations. She traveled across the country training social workers, law enforcement officers, and community advocates in recognizing and responding to the kinds of schemes Danny had perfected. Financial fraud doesn't just steal money, Maya began, her voice steady and confident in ways that still surprised her. It steals trust, dignity, and the fundamental belief that hard work and honest living will be rewarded. When we help families recover from these crimes, we're not just rebuilding bank accounts, we're rebuilding faith in the possibility of justice. As she spoke, Maya caught sight of a familiar face in the audience. Sophia Martinez, now 20 and in her junior year of social work school, was taking notes with the intensity Maya remembered from their first meeting at the community center. Sophia had become one of Maya's mentees, a young woman whose experience as a victim had transformed into a passion for protecting others. After the presentation, Sophia approached Maya with the enthusiasm that had made her such an effective advocate for other fraud victims. Maya, that section about institutional trauma was brilliant. I've been seeing that pattern with some of the families I'm working with in my field placement. Maya smiled, feeling the particular pride that came from watching someone find their calling. Tell me about it. As Sophia described her work with immigrant families who had been victimized by predatory financial services, Maya was struck by how much had changed in such a short time. 3 years ago, she was a victim herself, struggling to understand how someone she loved could have destroyed so many lives. Now she was part of a movement that had helped hundreds of families rebuild and had prevented countless others from falling prey to similar schemes. The work wasn't always easy. Maya still carried the weight of knowing that her brother was serving time in federal prison, that families were still dealing with the financial consequences of his crimes, that some elderly victims had never fully recovered from the betrayal they had experienced. But she had learned to channel that pain into purpose, to transform her own trauma into tools for helping others. 5 years later, Maya's apartment now served as both home and informal headquarters for the Riverside Foundation for Financial Justice, a nonprofit she had founded with Patricia Williams and several other colleagues. The organization provided direct services to fraud victims while also advocating for policy changes that would make it harder for predators to exploit vulnerable populations. On a Friday evening in late spring, Maya was reviewing grant applications when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the area code made her pause. Hello? It's Danny. Maya's hand tightened on the phone. She hadn't spoken to her brother since his sentencing 5 years earlier, though she received occasional updates about his status through the federal victim notification system. Danny? You're out. Early release for good behavior. Maya, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to call. I needed to try to say something real to you. Maya walked to her window, looking down at the street where she'd built a life Danny had never been part of. What do you want to say? I've had 5 years to think about what I did, not just to the families I hurt, but to you. Maya, you were the best person in my life, and I turned you into evidence against me. I weaponized your love, and I've had to live with that knowledge every day. Maya listened to her brother's voice, older now, lacking the manic confidence that had characterized his speech before prison. Are you looking for forgiveness, Danny? I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness,
But I wanted you to know that I understand now what you sacrificed to testify against me. You lost your brother to do the right thing, and that couldn't have been easy." Maya felt tears she hadn't expected. "I didn't lose my brother, Danny. I finally admitted that the brother I thought I had never really existed." Maybe that's true. Maybe the person who could do what I did was never worthy of having you as a sister. They talked for 20 more minutes, the longest conversation they'd had since the coffee shop meeting that had been recorded by federal agents. Danny told her about the work he'd done in prison, facilitating financial literacy classes for other inmates. He'd earned his GED, then a bachelor's degree in accounting through a prison education program. "I'm working for a nonprofit now," he said, "helping people file their taxes honestly, understand their rights with the IRS. It doesn't make up for what I did, but it's something." After they hung up, Maya sat in her apartment thinking about second chances and redemption, about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. She was glad Danny was trying to rebuild his life honestly, but she also knew that some bridges, once burned, could never be fully repaired. 7 years later, Maya walked across the stage at the Capitol building to receive the governor's award for excellence in public service. In the 7 years since Danny's crimes had destroyed her quiet life, she had helped establish victim services programs in 12 states, trained over 2,000 social workers and law enforcement officers, and directly assisted more than 800 families in recovering from financial fraud. In the audience, she could see the faces of people who had become her chosen family. Patricia Williams, now retired but still volunteering with the foundation; Sophia Martinez, now a licensed social worker running her own program for immigrant victims; Agent Rodriguez, who had become a close friend and frequent collaborator; Mrs. Rodriguez, now 88 and still attending every event Maya spoke at. As the governor spoke about Maya's contributions to protecting vulnerable populations, Maya thought about the path that had brought her here. Danny's betrayal had shattered her old life completely, but from those pieces, she had built something larger, more meaningful, more aligned with her deepest values than anything she could have imagined. After the ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues, but her eyes kept returning to a corner of the reception hall where Sophia was talking animatedly with a group of young social workers. Sophia was describing the new program she was launching.
Partnership between law enforcement and social services designed to provide immediate support to fraud victims. Maya excused herself from the conversation she was having and walked over to Sophia's group. "Sophia, tell them about the rapid response protocol you've developed." As Sophia explained her innovative approach to victim services, Maya felt the deep satisfaction that came from watching the next generation take the work further than she ever could have alone. This was how change really happened, not through individual heroism, but through the patient building of systems and relationships that could outlast any single person's efforts. 10 years later, Maya stood in the lobby of the new Riverside Center for Financial Justice, a building that had been constructed with a combination of federal grants, private donations, and community fundraising efforts. The center housed not just victim services, but also research facilities, training programs, and a legal clinic that provided free representation to fraud victims. Today marked the 10th anniversary of Danny's sentencing, and Maya had been asked to speak at the center's dedication ceremony. As she looked around the lobby filled with staff, clients, community leaders, and families who had been helped by the programs that had grown from her initial work, she felt a profound sense of completion. Sophia approached, now 30 and the center's associate director, carrying Maya's 2-year-old daughter Emma, who had been charming visitors all morning. "Mama!" Emma reached for Maya with chubby arms, and Maya felt the particular joy that came from this child, who represented everything good about starting over, about building a life based on love rather than obligation. Maya had married James Rodriguez, Agent Rodriguez's younger brother and a fellow social worker, 3 years earlier. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the desperate need for rescue that had characterized her relationship with Danny. James understood her work, supported her mission,
and never asked her to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right. As Maya took Emma from Sophia, she looked around the lobby at the photographs lining the walls, pictures of families who had been helped, programs that had been launched, policies that had been changed. In one corner hung a photo from the very first workshop she had taught at the community center, with Sophia sitting in the back row taking notes. The keynote speaker for the dedication was Judge Morrison, the same judge who had sentenced Danny 10 years earlier. In her remarks, she spoke about the transformation she had witnessed, not just in Maya, but in the entire approach to financial crime prosecution and victim services. 10 years ago, families victimized by financial fraud had few resources and little hope of recovery, Judge Morrison said. Today, thanks to the work pioneered here at Riverside, we have comprehensive systems for helping victims rebuild their lives and preventing others from falling prey to similar schemes. After the ceremony, Maya found herself alone in her office, looking out at the city where she had learned to build a life without the toxic dynamics that had defined her relationship with Danny. On her desk sat a letter that had arrived that morning, a note from Danny, who now worked full-time for a nonprofit in another state, helping formerly incarcerated individuals navigate financial systems honestly. Maya, the letter read, I saw the news coverage of the center's dedication. I'm proud of what you've built, and I understand why you haven't responded to my previous letters. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that every day I try to live in a way that might somehow balance the scales for what I took from all those families. I hope you're happy. Maya folded the letter and placed it in a file folder labeled Danny, not because she was planning to respond, but because she had learned the importance of documentation, of keeping accurate records of all the important moments in her life. Emma toddled into the office, followed by James, who was carrying takeout containers from their favorite restaurant.
How does it feel? James asked, settling Emma into her high chair and beginning to unpack their dinner. Seeing 10 years of work celebrated like this. Maya considered the question as she watched Emma carefully manipulate her spoon, concentrating on the simple task of feeding herself. It feels like the work is just beginning. We've helped thousands of families, but there are still predators out there, still vulnerable people who need protection. That's not what I meant, James said gently. How does it feel to know that you took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that's helped so many people? Maya thought about the scared, betrayed woman she had been 10 years ago, sitting in her small apartment trying to understand how her own brother could have destroyed her life so thoroughly. That woman couldn't have imagined this office, this family, the sense of purpose that got her up every morning ready to fight for people she'd never met. It feels like I finally understand the difference between family and loyalty, she said. Real loyalty isn't protecting people from the consequences of their actions. It's holding them accountable because you believe they can be better. As they ate dinner together, this small family she had built from scratch, based on truth rather than obligation, Maya reflected on the strange paths that led people to their real lives. Danny's betrayal had shattered everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. But from those pieces, she had built something stronger, more authentic, more aligned with her deepest values. 15 years later, Maya stood at the podium in the House of Representatives, preparing to testify before a congressional subcommittee on financial services reform. The legislation under consideration, the Vulnerable Populations Financial Protection Act, had been drafted based on 15 years of research and advocacy work that had grown from her initial efforts to help Danny's victims. In the gallery, she could see familiar faces mixed with new ones. Sophia, now running her own national organization focused on immigrant financial protection, Mrs. Rodriguez, 93 years old and still attending every important hearing, representatives from victim services organizations across the country, many of whom had trained at the Riverside Center. Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee, Maya began,
Financial predators target vulnerable populations because they understand that desperation makes people susceptible to promises that seem too good to be true. Effective prevention requires not just law enforcement action after crimes are committed, but proactive education and support systems that give people alternatives to predatory services. As Maya testified about the need for comprehensive financial protection measures, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 15 years earlier, she had been a victim, struggling to understand how someone she loved could have caused so much harm. Now she was helping to shape federal policy that would protect millions of families from similar exploitation. The questions from committee members were substantive and well-informed, a reflection of how much public understanding of financial fraud had evolved. Maya answered each one with the confidence that came from years of direct service work, from sitting with hundreds of families as they described their experiences, from understanding both the systemic vulnerabilities that predators exploited and the interventions that actually helped people recover. After the hearing, Maya walked through the corridors of the Capitol building with Sophia and several other advocates, debriefing the session and planning their next steps. As they emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, Sophia turned to Maya with the same enthusiasm she'd shown as a college student. "Do you think they'll pass it?" Sophia asked. Maya smiled, thinking about the long arc of social change, about how progress happened through the patient accumulation of small victories rather than dramatic breakthroughs. "I think they've built enough momentum that they'll have to take action. Maybe not everything we want, but enough to make a real difference."
That evening, Maya sat in her hotel room video calling with James and Emma, now 12 and full of questions about Maya's work in Washington. As Emma described her own school project about financial literacy, inspired by her mother's work, Maya felt the particular satisfaction that came from knowing that the next generation was already building on the foundation she and her colleagues had laid. 20 years later, Maya walked through the archives of the Riverside Center, now expanded to occupy an entire city block and serving as a national model for comprehensive financial crime victim services. The walls were lined with photographs, documents, and artifacts from 2 decades of work, including the original case file from Danny's prosecution, which had been donated to the center's research collection. At 62, Maya was preparing for retirement from direct service work, though she planned to continue teaching and writing about financial fraud prevention. The center now employed over 200 people and served thousands of families each year, while the policy advocacy work had resulted in federal legislation that had fundamentally changed how financial crimes were investigated and prosecuted. Sophia, now the center's executive director, found Maya in the archives reviewing materials for a book she was writing about the evolution of victim services. "The university press called," Sophia said. "They want to move up the publication date for your book. Apparently, there's been renewed interest in financial fraud prevention after that congressional hearing last month." Maya nodded, still somewhat amazed that her story had become part of a larger narrative about social change and institutional reform. The book, tentatively titled From Victim to Advocate, Building Systems of Justice, would trace the development of modern financial crime victim services through her own experience and the stories of the hundreds of families she had worked with over the years. "Sophia, I've been thinking about the dedication." "Oh, I want to dedicate it to Mrs. Rodriguez. She passed away last year, but she attended every single event we held for 18 years. She understood that healing from betrayal requires not just individual recovery, but community action." Sophia smiled. She would have loved that. Remember how she used to tell new clients that justice is not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the innocent? As they walked through the center together, Maya reflected on the strange mathematics of trauma and recovery. Danny's betrayal had destroyed her old life completely, but it had also revealed capacities for resilience and leadership she never would have discovered otherwise. The scared woman who answered Agent Rodriguez's call 20 years earlier couldn't have imagined this building, these programs, the thousands of families who had been helped because she had chosen truth over family loyalty. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, but the content made her smile. It was a photo of a young woman in a graduation cap and gown with a message that read, "Miss Chen,
You probably don't remember me, but you helped my family 10 years ago when we were victims of tax fraud. I just graduated from law school and I'm starting work at the FTC's Financial Practices Division next month. Thank you for showing me that victims can become advocates." Messages like that arrived regularly now from young lawyers, social workers, policy advocates, and community organizers who had been inspired by their families' experiences with the center's services. Maya had learned that this was how real change propagated, not through individual heroism, but through the ripple effects of people who had been helped finding ways to help others.
Maya stood at the podium in the auditorium of the Maya Chen Institute for Financial Justice, a research and training facility that had been established in her honor by a consortium of universities and nonprofit organizations. At 67, she was delivering what she had announced would be her final keynote address, marking 25 years since Danny's sentencing and the beginning of her transformation from victim to advocate. The audience was a mixture of old friends and new faces, survivors of financial crimes, social workers, law enforcement officers, policymakers, and students who had grown up in a world where the protections Maya had helped establish were simply part of the landscape. Sophia, now 55 and a nationally recognized expert in her own right, sat in the front row with her teenage daughter, who was considering a career in victim advocacy. 25 years ago, Maya began, her voice still strong and clear. I received a phone call that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and my place in the world. My own brother had been using my identity to commit federal crimes, destroying not just my credit and reputation, but the lives of hundreds of families who had trusted him with their most precious resources. She paused, looking out at the faces before her, many of them people whose lives had been touched by the work that had grown from that devastating phone call. I could have spent the rest of my life being bitter about what was taken from me. I could have focused on the betrayal, the broken trust, the years of rebuilding that lay ahead. Instead, I learned something that changed everything. Our worst experiences can become the foundation for our most meaningful work, but only if we choose to transform pain into purpose. Maya spoke about the evolution of victim services, the policy changes that had been implemented, the thousands of families who had been helped by programs that had grown from her initial efforts. But she also spoke about the personal cost of that work, the relationships that had been strained, the nights she had lain awake worrying about clients, the weight of carrying so many stories of betrayal and loss. The work of justice is not glamorous, she said. It requires showing up every day for people you may never meet, fighting battles you may not live to see won, believing in systems even when they fail you personally. But it also offers something that personal revenge never could. The possibility that your suffering might prevent someone else's. After her speech, Maya found herself surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues, but her attention was drawn to a young man who waited patiently at the edge of the crowd. When the others had dispersed, he approached her with obvious nervousness. "Ms. Chen, my name is Michael Chen. No relation," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "I'm a graduate student studying financial crime prevention, and I've been following your work for years, but I wanted to meet you for a personal reason." Maya waited, recognizing something familiar in his demeanor. "My father was one of your brother's victims. Our family lost everything when I was 8 years old. Our house, my college fund, my parents' retirement savings. We had to move in with my grandparents, and my parents, they never really recovered from the betrayal." Maya felt the familiar weight of guilt and responsibility that still surfaced when she met Danny's victims. "I'm so sorry for what my brother did to your family." "That's not why I'm here," Michael said quickly. "I'm here because watching you turn that experience into something positive, it's what inspired me to get into this field. I'm writing my dissertation on victim services models, and I wanted you to know that your work didn't just help the families you serve directly. It helped me understand that being a victim doesn't have to be the end of your story." As Maya walked home that evening through the city that had become the epicenter of a national movement for financial justice, she reflected on the strange mathematics of redemption.
Danny's crimes had destroyed hundreds of lives, including her own carefully constructed existence. But the response to those crimes, the work that had grown from her decision to testify, to choose justice over family loyalty, had helped thousands of families and fundamentally changed how society responded to financial predators. Maya's phone rang as she reached her apartment building. The caller ID showed a number she had seen before, but never answered. Danny's quarterly attempts to contact her had continued for years, though she had never responded to any of them. This time, something made her answer.
Maya? Danny's voice was older, frailer than she remembered. I know you've never answered before, but I saw the coverage of your speech today, and I needed to try one more time. Maya walked into her apartment, looking around at the photographs that documented her life's work, pictures with presidents and policymakers, moments with families she had helped, celebrations of legislative victories. What do you want, Danny? I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of what you've built. I know that sounds hollow coming from me, but watching you turn the worst thing I ever did into something that's helped so many people, it's shown me what real strength looks like. Maya sat down in her favorite chair, the same one where she had made the decision 25 years earlier to cooperate with the federal investigation. I'm dying, Maya. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. Danny's voice was steady, accepting. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for reconciliation, but I wanted you to know that I've spent every day of the last 25 years trying to balance the scales for what I did. How many families have you helped, Danny? Over the years? Maybe 3,000? Tax preparation, financial counseling, helping people navigate bankruptcy and credit repair. It doesn't make up for what I took from people, but it's something. Maya was quiet for a long time, thinking about the complexities of justice and redemption, about the difference between forgiveness and accountability. Danny, I'm not going to tell you that what you did was forgivable. Too many families are still dealing with the consequences of your choices. But I'm glad you found a way to spend your life helping people instead of hurting them. Maya, can I ask you something? Do you think there was any part of the brother you loved that was real? Maya looked at a photograph on her end table. Emma, now 27 and working as a financial crimes prosecutor, standing with Maya at the signing of the latest federal legislation they had helped draft. I think the little boy who built Lego cities with me was real, but the man who chose to destroy families for profit, that was real too. People are complicated, Danny. We're all capable of both great love and terrible harm. I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you specifically. I know that doesn't matter, but Danny, it does matter. Intent doesn't erase impact, but it's part of the truth. I've learned that healing requires understanding the whole truth, not just the parts that fit the story we want to tell. They talked for another 20 minutes, the longest conversation they had shared since that recorded call 25 years earlier. When they hung up, Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment, feeling something she hadn't expected, a sense of completion. 3 months later, Maya received a letter from Danny's lawyer informing her that he had passed away and that he had left his modest savings to the Maya Chen Institute with a note requesting that the money be used to help families victimized by financial fraud. Maya read the letter twice, then called Sophia. He left everything to the Institute, Maya said. About $50,000. Not much, but it's something, Sophia finished. What do you want to do with it? Maya thought about the young man who had approached her after her speech and the hundreds of graduate students and young professionals who were building careers in victim advocacy and the next generation that would carry this work forward.
Let's use it to fund a scholarship program for graduate students whose families were victims of financial crime and who want to work in victim services. We'll call it the Recovery Scholarship. Not named for Danny, but for the process of healing. 6 months after Danny's death, Maya stood in the same auditorium where she had given her farewell speech, watching the first recipients of the Recovery Scholarship receive their awards. Among them was Michael Chen, the young man whose family had been destroyed by Danny's crimes and who was now completing his doctorate in victim services research. As Michael accepted his award, he spoke about the strange journey that had brought him to this moment, how his family's worst experience had become the foundation for his life's work, how victimization had transformed into advocacy. Maya listened to his words, recognizing the same pattern that had defined her own journey, the alchemy that could transform suffering into service, betrayal into justice, personal tragedy into collective healing. After the ceremony, Maya walked home through the city one more time, past the Riverside Family Services building, where she had first learned to help families in crisis, past the community center, where she had taught her first financial literacy workshops, past the federal courthouse, where she had chosen justice over family loyalty. At 70, Maya was finally ready to step back from active advocacy work, to let the institutions and systems she had helped build carry the work forward, but she was also ready for something else, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her life had mattered, that the phone call that had shattered her world 25 years earlier had ultimately led to something larger and more meaningful than anything she could have planned. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, saw the news coverage of the scholarship ceremony. I'm proud of you. See you for dinner Sunday?" Maya smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it. Love you." As she reached her building, Maya looked up at the windows glowing with warm light, each one representing a life being lived, a family building their future, a story still being written. 25 years earlier, she had thought her story was ending. Instead, she had learned that sometimes the most devastating chapters are just the beginning of something entirely new. Maya rode the elevator to her floor, unlocked her door, and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of her home, a space filled with photographs of people she had helped, awards recognizing work she was proud of, and books containing the stories of families who had found their way from victimization to healing. She made herself a cup of tea and sat down to read the latest reports from victim services programs across the country, each one building on the foundation she and her colleagues had laid, each one proof that individual trauma could be transformed into collective resilience. Outside her window, the city hummed with the quiet energy of people living their lives, building their futures, trusting in systems that were more just and protective than they had been 25 years earlier. Maya smiled, closed the reports, and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families in need of help, and new opportunities to turn pain into purpose. The work would continue, carried forward by people like Sophia and Michael and Emma and hundreds of others who understood that justice was not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the innocent, and that sometimes the most meaningful life was one built on the ruins of the life you had planned.